What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. On this installment on my channel, I'm going to start trying to bring this old 94 Impala SS back to life. It's been off the road for about 15 years. No particular reason, just don't want to drive it. And because it's been sitting for so long, the paint's deteriorated because it's been outside. The paint's deteriorated. The engine's it's probably leaking everywhere just because it's been sitting. I don't even want to attempt to try and start it without tearing the motor apart. The transmission, I'm going to have a new torque converter and replace the clutches with some better clutches, and then replace the fuel tank, the fuel pump, clean out the gas tank, and then I may even, I don't know how far I'm going to go with this because my son gets his license in 2 months, so I can't get too carried away with this. But I would really love to be able to tear this car apart and do a new paint job on it. I've actually got the factory paint to repaint it. I just don't know that I have enough time to do it. And then I would like to buy a new upholstery for the seats and redo the seats, just because the car's been sitting in the sun for 15 years down here in the South Georgia heat. And it's done a number on the car. It should have been inside. It is what it is. Didn't have anywhere to put it in dry storage for any time, so unfortunately it's been sitting outside. So I'm going to try and bring it back to life. Now, for those of you that don't know about these Impalas, in 1994, this is a pretty rare car, all things considered. They only made this body style for 3 years, 94, 95, and 96. And in 94, they made exactly 6,303. And this one right here is number 5,392. I was told a long time ago that it was one of the ones in the 300s, but I actually got onto an Impala SS registry forum and I actually found out the actual specific data on the car. And it is number 5,392 out of 6,303. And my dad is, to my knowledge, the original owner of this car. I could be wrong. He could have bought it used, but I'm pretty certain he's the original owner of this car. If he's not the original owner, he bought it within the first 6 months of it being bought and traded back in, because he bought it back in 94 or 95. So it was either a very slightly used car or it was brand new when he got it. But it's been in our family ever since 95. And I took ownership of it about 15 years ago, and it's just been sitting. I had a shop, and I did have it sitting in my shop for a couple years, but then when I bought this place, there was nowhere to store it inside, because I can't store any of my cars inside. I mean, you can see them all sitting out here anyway. So it's unfortunate, but it's been sitting outside. So I'm gonna tear this thing apart and get it back on the road. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this. Now, I want to go over a few of the key things that make this car different versus the 95 and the 96. So the 94 is the only year that has the mirror down on the door. 95 and 96, the mirror is up here on the window. Also, to my knowledge, the wheelbase is shorter. I don't know if that's true, but I've been told that the wheelbase is shorter by like an inch. I'm not 100% certain on that. I do know that this is different. On a 95 and 96, this is metal. It's not a plastic placard. And this is actually covering up, I believe the glass goes underneath here. I could be wrong, but I think the glass goes back to here, because it's a standard. All they did was pulled 94 Caprices off the line and threw a bunch of Impala badges on it and changed the interior and put the LT1 motor and the police package suspension on it. There's other stuff that they did to it, but yeah, it's a pretty cool car. My driver's side door handle does not like opening for some reason, so I got to open the back door and then open the front. But for being a car as old as it is, the interior isn't in horrible shape. It is. I do have a little bit of swelling on the armrest. The seats do have tears in them just from sun, and that one got some tears in it up there. But all the rest of the dash looks okay. Or I mean, the interior, the dash has cracks in it, which is typical of these cars. And because it's been sitting outside, I did have some mold develop in here, so I did have to clean the entire car. I haven't gotten it all off of here, but I'll be able to get it all clean. The headliner is starting to fall down from moisture in the car, and I believe that's from sitting outside. But yeah, I'm gonna bring this thing back to life. This has the very first LT1. And everything in this car is original. The only thing that has ever been replaced, to my knowledge, and that was because my dad and myself replaced it, is the radiator. Everything else in this car is 100% stock. It's never been monkeyed with in any way, shape, or form. I do believe that the speakers and the doors have been changed, but that's the only thing that's been changed on this entire car, and it was just the speakers. But yeah, so I'm gonna start by removing the entire air intake assembly, removing the top of the hat off the motor. I'm probably not gonna pull the radiator. I might, but I don't think I'm going to. I know I'm gonna pull the fans at minimum, and then I'll start separating what I need to separate. But this motor's pretty easy to take out. There's not a whole lot to it, so I should be able to have this motor out of here by the end of the day. Engine and transmission together. So really the only things that I should have to disconnect are the exhaust manifolds from the downpipes. So right there, and then on the other side, disconnect the AC, which I could leave hooked up, but this car's been sitting for so long, I'm probably going to replace the compressor. So I'll just go ahead and disconnect it anyway. And I'm more than likely going to replace the compressor, the alternator, the tensioner, the water pump, because it's an electronic water pump, and I don't think it's ever been serviced. So yeah, but I should be able to have this motor out relatively quickly. Disconnect throttle cable, disconnect the cruise control, brake booster, vacuum, automatic transmission cooler lines, drive shaft, and motor mounts, and then it should come out. One thing that I am a little bit upset about is the fact that these taillights, I was cutting my grass over at my old house and I had a rock come up and hit this taillight. And these are date coded. They have the 94 date code on them, if I can remember where it is. But they're date coded, and I would hate to be able to not be able to find another 94 taillight. Right there. So there's the date code, if I can get it to focus. It's not gonna focus, but it says DCT A in parentheses 2, IR in parentheses 2, S in parentheses 3, T, AP2, 93, guide 1B. So I need another taillight that shows a 93 so that I can have it has the correct date code. Because this car is one of 6,000 and it's never been messed with, I really want to make sure that it stays unmolested. I'm not really a purist when it comes to cars because I modify the crap out of every car I've ever owned, except for this car. I will never modify this car because it's basically untouched. I mean, yeah, it's got some damage. It needs to be cleaned up, needs fresh paint, but it's never been touched. So I want to keep it that way. All right, so in order to remove the air intake off of this car, I'm going to remove the two 14mm nuts that are up here on top, or 9/16, it's the same size. And then I'm going to take this hose clamp off, and then this hat will come off. And once you get that clamp loose and you take those two nuts off, the whole top of the intake comes off. Now I can go ahead and remove the sensor connector here. I can disconnect this vacuum. Get that separated. Loosen this clamp, and then I can loosen it here, and I can take this off, or I can take the entire box out, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to remove I think I'm going to remove the whole box, but I'm going to take just the top part of the air box off so I can get to the air filter. And I think there's bolts down inside of here too. Okay, so now I have the entire intake removed. I did have to disconnect the mass airflow sensor and the air injector pump for the exhaust, smog pump. But this is the air filter. All the media is gone, and it's just the metal frame now. But I'm gonna go ahead and I may not, yeah, I'm gonna remove this air box so I can clean everything out and get it all buttoned up, but I'll deal with that later. Right now I'm just gonna focus on taking the engine out. So to relieve this clamp, you just pull out on this one, and then you can pull out on the center one and it'll separate. Same with the clamp down there. So now I'm gonna drain the radiator if there is any fluid in it. I don't know if there is or not, but I'm gonna open the drains and make sure. Then I'll disconnect the radiator hoses and get them out of here. And I'll disconnect the heater hoses and the overflow tank hoses, which are right here. Makes it really convenient and easy to take off. I will have to unbolt them from the side of the alternator right here, or the alternator mounting bracket. So I will remove the tank. I'll go ahead and take those two nuts or screw clamps loose, take those hoses off and pull the tank out. And then I'll remove that bolt right there holding the heater hoses to the engine. And then you can see, like I said, this thing's been sitting for 15 years, so it definitely needs to come out and get taken apart and looked at. So I'm gonna enjoy seeing, I'm not gonna enjoy seeing how bad this has gotten, but it's gonna be interesting seeing what's happened with this thing sitting for 15 years. All right, so I wound up having to remove the passenger side fan so that I could get to the lower transmission line. So I've got the upper transmission line, which runs to the cooler, and then it runs back into the transmission. And this one, that's what this one is right here. And then the lower one is the other one. So I got both of those disconnected, got both of the radiator hoses disconnected, and took the top plate off right here. So all the parts that I've removed are right here. So the top plate's held in with 4 10mm bolts right there. The fan's held in with 2 10mm bolts. There's one here and one up here, right there. And then there's a little locking tab that it slides onto. You can see the other one slid onto it right there. So now that all that's disconnected, I can slide the radiator out of here, and then I'll start working on disconnecting wiring. Okay, I forgot this car has an oil cooler, so I have to disconnect the oil cooler lines. So I'm gonna remove this fan as well. So 10mm here, 10mm there, and then disconnect this oil cooler line. And there's another one down there, but I can't get to it because the fan's in the way, so that's why I gotta take the fan off. All right, so now the radiator is out. Disconnected the oil cooler lines, disconnected the trans cooler lines, and disconnected the radiator hoses. So now that all that's out, I'm gonna disconnect the 2 heater hoses right here and here, disconnect the bolt holding that in. Then I'm probably gonna remove the air box, start looking at disconnecting this wiring. I'm gonna leave it with the engine and pull it out with the engine when I pull it from the car, if I can. I don't know how this car is laid out. I may have to leave the harness in the car. I really hope I don't have to, but that may be the case. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so to get the air box out, you got that bolt right there, which is right here. And then you have 2 clips on the ECU cover. You got to push them in right there and right there. And you can see those clips right there and right there. And then there's 3 tabs. You can see them right there on the other side of the ECU that lock this in. So you release those and pull this up and then slide it to the side and pick up, and the whole thing comes out. Now that it's out, I can remove the ECU from the car and get all this wiring over with the engine. So that's what I'm gonna do. Okay, so the only things you need to disconnect in order to get the ECU wiring to go over and be able to sit on top of the engine is you got to disconnect the fluid level sensor and the pump for your washer fluid, and you got to disconnect this clamp right here. So all you do is you just push down on it and then push in on it, and it'll release. And you can take the wiring harness out and flip it over. So now I'm going to disconnect the brake booster and whatever those couple wires right there are. Disconnect the throttle cable and the cruise control cable right here. Get those out of the way. And then see what other wiring's hooked up on that back side. Disconnect the AC, and then I'll be able to go underneath and disconnect what I need to underneath. All right, to disconnect the cruise control and the throttle cable. Cruise control, you just, this is just a pop-on clip. So you just push down on it and it'll pop off that little clip right there. This one is just like a standard throttle cable. You just stick it in. Well, actually I'd be taking it out, but It's wrapped around there, so you just get slack on it and then push it from the back side and it'll come out. But you got to line up the wire with that little tab. Then to get these out, you can see these little clips right here. So there's one on the bottom on this one. There's one on the top on this one. You just pop those out and then slide the cable straight out. Pop that out and slide the cable straight out, and then they both come out. These two are fuel lines. I'm gonna have to use my quick disconnects to press the springs on the inside of these fittings. So right here and right here. And so I'm gonna go ahead and move to the other side of the vehicle. I know this is the only other stuff that I have to disconnect on this side, besides the exhaust, which I'll do that under the car. So yeah, it looks like everything else on this side of the car is disconnected so far. I don't see anything else that is physically attached except for the engine mount, which is obvious. I'll have to take that bolt out down there. But nothing else looks physically attached to the car on this side. So now I'm gonna move over to this side and start clearing this side out, because I got to disconnect the power steering. I got to disconnect the hoses from the pump. I got to disconnect the air conditioning. I got to get the heater hoses off of here, and I got to make sure this wiring over here is going to be able to go with the car. It goes up here to this box, so I'm hoping I can disconnect it out of this junction box and send that with the engine. All right, so everything that needs to be disconnected on this side of the car is on this bracket right here. So what I might wind up doing is I might wind up taking the belt off, take the alternator off, take the power steering pump off, and then take the AC compressor off, and show you how to remove the engine without disconnecting all this stuff, even though I'm still going to disconnect it and just take it out of my way to get it out of my way. But you'll be able to do this and just take the alternator. You'll have to remove the alternator completely and remove the bracket. Maybe. I'll have to see how all this is going to come apart, but I think that might be the easiest way to do it. Unbolt this bracket from the engine and pull the whole power steering pump off, and then pull the whole AC compressor off, and then that'll free up all this stuff on this side. Then really the only thing that's left to disconnect from the engine would be the wiring and the exhaust and the motor mount. So I think that's probably the route that I'm gonna go. Okay, so first things first, to remove the belt, you put a 13mm wrench on here, push like you're tightening it, and the belt will come off. You can slide it off and then slide it off the rest of the pulleys. The alternator's held in with 3 13mm bolts. So you got one here with a nut on the back, one here with the nut on the back, and then one on the back of the alternator. Right there. Then you've got your main power wire hooked up right here. That's also a 13mm. And then you've got this disconnect going in right here. Just pull up on that clip right there, and then it pops out. Now the alternator should be able to just come right out of there. All right, now that the alternator's out, I'm gonna go ahead and remove this bracket from the engine. So what I'm gonna wind up doing is I'm gonna take out that bolt right there. This one, maybe. I don't know, I gotta look and see what all I'm trying to take out. I might be able to take just the pump off of here. Let me see how this works. All right, guys, so I got that entire side disconnected. Disconnected the power steering in-feed line. It's a 5/8 wrench. Disconnected the feeder line from the tank and drain the tank. Disconnected the 3 bolts that hold the AC compressor to the front bracket. Then removed the power steering pump to get to the last bolt for that bracket, because it's behind the power steering pump. It was a bitch getting this disconnected and getting the hose disconnected, but I got it off. I did have to disconnect it from this side to twist the hose so that I could get it to come off the pump, but there's the hose right there. So everything's disconnected on this side. There's a clamp holding the oil cooler or the transmission cooler lines to the bottom of that bracket. You have to remove the pulley from the tensioner so that you can get to the bolt over here, and then you got to take all the bolts out of the entire bracket, and then it just comes right off, slides right off, no issues. Disconnect your AC compressor. It's got clips on both sides, so you got to pry out on both of those clips while you pull it out of that location right there. This is the connector for the pressure switch, and then that's the connector for the alternator. So, and all that stuff's gonna stay with the motor. So I'm just gonna tuck it up with the rest of the harness. So that's staying with the car. I got to disconnect this ground right here, so I need to disconnect this ground wire. I'm gonna leave it with the car. That's the main ground going to the battery. So I'll leave that with the car. I'm gonna leave the compressor in. So if you want to leave the compressor in here hooked up, that's all you really got to do is disconnect it and just leave it hanging. But I'm actually gonna disconnect the back side of this. I may leave it closed until I get my new compressor and my new condenser and evaporator, because I'm gonna replace the whole system. So I may leave it closed just to keep the lines clean until I get the new compressor, evaporator, and condenser. So yeah, anyway, here's all the spark plug leads off the OptiSpark. Just make sure it's not hooked around that power steering hose. And then, yeah, we're gonna disconnect that ground. And then I think I can, the only other thing that I have up top is gonna be to disconnect the rest of that wiring back there. And then I can get underneath it and start disconnecting the exhaust, motor mounts, transmission lines, transmission mount, shifter, and drive shaft. And that should be everything that I have to disconnect. All right, so in order to remove the wiring harness from the car to keep it with the engine, you got 4 connectors underneath the dash. So I'm in the passenger side. I had to remove the entire side rocker panel. It's held in with 4 screws. So you got one here, one here, one here, and one here. And mine was cracked, unfortunately, so it actually is broken right there at one of the screws. But pull that off, pull this panel off, and then you can get to these. These 3 are quick disconnects. You just push in on the little clip on here, and then on these, it's on this one and this one. And then this one is screwed in right here, and it's a 7mm. You got 2 7mm bolts that you have to take out of the firewall on the engine compartment side to pull the wiring harness through. And I'll show you those here in just a second. So the 2 screws that you got to pull out are down in here. I can get it to focus. So there's a screw right there and another screw over there on that side. And they're both 7mm. Take those out, and then now I should be able to pull the whole harness out and keep it with the motor. I disconnected the light for the hood, disconnected the wiper motor, the AC pressure switch, and the another body connector going up here. I think it's for the fans, I'm not certain. It's this connector right here. So yeah, it's going to the fans and to the headlights, I think. So that's what this connector is for. This is the pressure switch. So now I've got all the wiring disconnected. I'm gonna pull it up and put it up on the motor. Everything else I have left to do is just the fuel lines, and then everything else is underneath. All right, so I got all the wires pulled up. I just checked my HVAC system, and it's completely empty, which I figured it would be because it's been sitting for 15 years. So to make it a little easier on myself, I'm gonna actually disconnect the tank and the hoses, and I'm going to disconnect them from the evaporator and get all that crap out of my way. I'm going to pull the compressor out of here just to make it easier on myself. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to just to make it easier. All right, everybody, so now I have everything disconnected from the driver's side and the passenger side from up top. So the only thing left to disconnect on the passenger side is the wire going to the starter for the battery. It's this cable right here. And then the only other thing to unhook on the driver's side is the 2 fuel lines. I'm going to unhook those at the very end because I don't want fuel falling down on my face. And then I also got to disconnect this ground wire up here. So there's a ground wire right there, and it's a 10mm back there. You can barely see it, but it's right there. So I'm going to disconnect ground. I'm not going to disconnect fuel lines until I'm absolutely ready to pull the motor. I'm going to disconnect the starter cable, then I'll get underneath it and disconnect all the stuff under it. I will say one good thing about these cars is the trunks on them are huge. I just put all the parts that I've taken off into the trunk, and now I'm gonna get under the car and disconnect everything that's underneath it. All right, guys, so I just got the exhaust separated. I got 2 of the bolts on the passenger side broke, and then all 3 of the ones on the driver's side came out, and I got 1 on the driver's side to come, 1 on the passenger side to actually come off. So those 3 bolts are right there. You can see 2 of them, and the other ones are right somewhere over here, right there. So you can also disconnect them right there, and then right there and right there. I don't think I'm gonna do that, but I can if I choose to. So now I need to disconnect these 2 lines right here, and I need to disconnect the shifter linkage, which is right there. So as it stands right now, the only stuff that I have left to disconnect is the 2 transmission lines, the transmission cooler lines. I got to disconnect both of those, and then I think all I got left is the transmission mount and the 2 engine mounts, and I should be ready to pick this thing up, and the fuel lines. But I'm not going to disconnect the fuel lines until I actually have the engine hoist hooked up to the engine and I'm ready to pull it. All right, so now I got both of the motor mount bolts out and the shifter out. Motor mount bolts are 11/16 one side, 5/8 the other side. The nut is 11/16, the bolt is 5/8. Took both of those out. Now all I got left is the transmission mount and 2 transmission cooler lines. Okay, so I was wrong. The last time the car drove was in 2013. I drove it for about 6 months, and then I canceled the insurance and parked it again. So yeah, it's only been 11 years that it's been sitting, but still. I've also disconnected the starter wire that was going to the battery. You can't really see it, but this wire right here, I disconnected it from the starter. So all my wiring's disconnected from the car. All the wiring is disconnected from the car. Both the bolts are out of the motor mounts. All the cooling systems disconnected, power steering systems disconnected, air conditioning systems disconnected, exhaust bolts are removed. I still got to remove the 2 transmission cooler lines and transmission mount, and then I'll be ready to hook up the hoist to this and take the hood off and start pulling the motor. All right, everybody, I was having trouble disconnecting the transmission lines from the transmission because of where they are. I removed the freaking exhaust piece, so that's the downpipe that goes from the header down to the rest of the exhaust. I only removed it from this side. I'm thinking about removing it from that side, but I don't know if I'm going to. It was just 4 more bolts to take it off. Took it off so that I could get access to the bolt or to the lines back there. You still can't get access to them. So what I wound up doing was I wound up removing the front oil cooler that's mounted right here, disconnected the lines, and then I was able to pull the line back. And here's the line that goes to the oil cooler, and then there's the line that goes to the radiator oil cooler. So everything is disconnected now. I went and bought some chain because I'm missing 2 of my sections of chain from a leveler. And I went and bought some chain, but it was too small. So I'm gonna go buy another thing of chain and get the right size, and then I'll be ready to pick this thing up. I have disconnected the drive shaft. I haven't pulled it yet, but I did go ahead and disconnect it. So it is just held on. It's a standard drive shaft connection. You can't see it because I got the freaking exhaust hanging down, but it's 4 7/16 bolts, and they're the little U-bolt clamps that wrap around the U-joint. So yeah, remove those, and that's ready to go. And remove the lines and got that ready. So the only thing I have left is to disconnect the fuel lines, and I was waiting until I was done underneath the car before I did that. So I got to drain the transmission, disconnect the fuel lines, and pick it up. All right, so I just got done removing the other exhaust catalytic converter off the driver's side, and I took the hood off. It was a little more challenging than doing one of the little car's hoods by yourself, but I was able to do it. There's 3 bolts that hold it in. You got this bolt here, and then you got a bolt coming in from the side. These 2 are 1/2 inch. That one's a 7/16. and then you've got a shim in between the hood and that bolt, so it goes on the side right there, or at least my car had a shim. You may have more or less, or thicker or thinner, but that's how they line the body up. I did not see one on the other side, so we're just going to work under the assumption that there was not one on that side, unless it fell when I was taking the hood off. Yeah, there it is. So there's the shim for the other side. So you got that little 7/16. It might even be 3/8. I used an adjustable. I think it's 3/8. And then a 1/2 inch. All right, so now I am actually ready to pull the motor. So I'm gonna hook the crane up and try and get this thing out of here. All right, guys, I was not ready to pull the motor. I had to pull the transmission cross member. I had to pull the drive shaft support in order to get the transmission to move enough. So now I've got that off. Now I'm ready to pull the engine and transmission together. All right, guys, so the engine's out. Got it sitting right there. Complete engine bay emptied. So that's going to be how you remove the engine on a 94 Impala SS. It should be very similar for 95, 96 Impala. The only difference I think would be the shifter, because they have a floor shifter and this one has a column shifter. This would be the same for a Chevy Caprice and for a Buick Roadmaster. So any one of those B-body vehicles, this would be the procedure for removing the engine. So if this helped you out in any way, like always, please like, comment, share, subscribe, let your friends see what I'm doing. I'm going to be doing what I call the poor man's rebuild on this engine. I'm not going to be replacing the bearings or the rings or any of that. But I'm going to basically tear it completely down. I'll replace the water pump, oil pump, new gaskets, and new valve guide seals and all that. But I won't actually replace the bearings or the main bearings, rod bearings, or the piston rings. Everything else I'll replace: rear main seal, front main seal, all that good stuff. So that'll be the next video regarding the Impala. I should have a video on the Lexus posted in a day or two. I got it about halfway done, and then I'm going to work on the Veloster again. I'm on vacation this week, or this coming week, so I'm going to be working on the Veloster and the Impala, and I'm also going to be building the engine that's right there on my porch for this Audi for my son. So got a lot of shit going on this week. Should have several videos posted this week for different vehicles, so hopefully it'll help y'all out if you need to know anything about any of these vehicles. So yeah, I'll check you in the next one. Have a great one.